Great. Thanks so much, Anne, for the kind introduction. It's really great to be here. I'm excited. A big thank you to the organizers for throwing such a cool event and for working on such a cool project, right? ADOCS. I've been witnessing for a couple of years now the amazing digital initiatives, projects, endeavors, labs that are up and running at KBR, and I'm in awe to see that ADOCS comes to the fore and takes center stage today. And again, I'm thrilled to be a part of this. I'm very grateful for being given the chance to give a short talk here. Well, my talk is going to be it's going to mark a bit of a change of pace. Not so much a project-based talk, but more like reflections or the musings, if you will, the musings of a poet of no muse, or a poet whose muse are the users. So a muser, if you will, a computational poet for whom the muses are the web-based users. Therefore, bear with me. These are just some, like I said, couple of thoughts that will represent once in a while tie-ins with the kind of research I do, but they're mostly focused on the general context of things that are at stake today, that are in discussion here, but then the Q&A could lead us maybe to further specifics relevant to what I do in particular. So I was going to focus a little bit on the central concept here. Data, of course, well, it's the central concept today, but not only today, maybe it's the center of our culture, right? Cultures of connectivity. To cite, to reference a very well-known title. And it's always good to start with the conclusion, right? Data are the premise and the conclusion. And what do I mean by that is that, and they represent links, right? They link to other data continuously. Well, data is, and I included here the definition, the standard definition from the Oxford English Dictionary. It is a mass noun. Sometimes in English we tend to use data as singular, right? Data is this, data is that, but it's actually a plural, and we're sometimes forgetful of that. But while being at main concern nowadays, it's also interesting to see how it kind of links back to more traditional concerns or approaches, and I just enumerated a couple of them here, such as visual rhetoric and multimodal writing. A very recent contribution on that, actually a special issue of Kairos, recently dedicated to that. And then data is related to rhetoric in a wider DH, that is digital humanities, right? DH context, very often referenced, titled Lisa Gittelman, Raw Data is an Oxymoron. Well, a book that comes with this and illustrates this very concept that data are always cooked. There's a semantics, there's a rhetoric informing data in general, and then we tend to think of data as something fixed, something that's out there, that is available, ready, up for grabs, as we say, but they're actually generated, said Lev Manovich, right, as far back as 1998. He also said the data need to be imagined before they exist. So we have all these complex configurations, but coming closer to the present day, very recent approaches that grabbed my attention go and revisit the concept in the light of traditional mathematics. I'm glad Anne is here as the chair of this panel. Euclid himself dealt with and came up with this concept of data, and to him it comprehended both premise and demonstrated conclusion, and therefore the logical way in which we articulate propositions, that's also a form of data, and I'll go back to that in a second. But for now, I want to take away from this very brief introduction is that data is a form of knowledge, and it comes with demonstrations, with logical demonstrations that are there, even if implicit or explicit, implicitly or explicitly so. And 10 years to this day, Joanna Drucker published an article in DHQ, Digital Humanities Quarterly, on data actually as capta, right? Data, the etymology, the Latin etymology means given, right? And Drucker's point was that what seems to be given is not actually given. And I think it already emerged from my very brief introduction that things are not that easy or that simple. And the actually right term, for various reasons that we can detail during the Q&A, should be actually called capta. It's not something that is given, it's something that you need to grab. It's something you need to get, that you need to take, you need to capture, right? Well, that, speaking from experience, so true to life, as far as I'm concerned, and dealing, for instance, with print collections, I could easily describe them as a combo of big data and the great unread, right? Both of these being buzz terms in AI. Itself a buzzword, as Anne so rightly said, and the great unread in DH and mostly in the digital literary studies. You need, when dealing with such issues, to capture that data. Data is not available, it's not given. It's exactly what's maybe the most characteristic of the data in such context. It's not given, it's not accessible, definitely not easily accessible. And still, again, 10 years to the day, we have this contribution coming from Levin that recontextualizes the Drucker's notion of capta and goes further and deeper into the etymology of the term, the cultural connotations, and redefines data actually as situated knowledge. Well, what kind of situatedness, rhetorical, political, particularly in the DH approaches, are political and cultural, and then computer science, tractable or non-tractable. In computer science, we don't usually whine about data being raw or not. We don't really, or we're not traditionally rather worried about data being not really raw from a political or cultural point of view. But in recent approaches, again, for instance, Tobias Blanke, we can see that the contribution of the humanities, and particularly digital humanities, to artificial intelligence, exactly making artificial intelligence practitioners and computer scientists aware of the fact that there is an ethical dimension to data. Speaking of data capta, so I prefer then to use sort of twofold term, if you will, data capta, taking into account both, like I said, the point that Drucker so rightfully made, and now the amendments made to it 10 years after. I'm looking at that as intermedial, networked, and performative. And I'm drawing here on recent contributions to the philosophy of media, like Larrue and Vitali-Rosati, their take on intermediality, and their the title speaks for itself. Media do not exist. It's all intermediation. It's all dynamics, and the multifaceted nature and situatedness, like I said, of data is so much the more obvious in such contexts in which intermediality is like the order of the day. And that's where projects like ADOCS, I'd say, step in, right? The challenges of digitization and so on and so forth. Since intermedial, then data are definitely networked. Like I said before, they attract, they enact more and more links, and performative. In the talk that I gave earlier this year, also at KBR, actually, Digital Heritage Seminar series co-organized by KBR with ULB and UGent, and namely by Digital Research Lab and CAMI. I talked about live archiving and living/live archives. I don't want to rehash all that here, if it makes sense, but just a small recap. I'm looking at data and collections and naturally archives. And on that note, a shout out to Sally, and thank you for bringing up this notion of collections as data. We talk about different kind of archives, archives of live content, archives that are made live, in performance or performatively live, intermedially live, and that in their turn, in and of themselves, become therefore live or even alive. A concept I will come back to in just a bit. A few words about one of the projects that I've been leading. This one goes as far back as 2010. I started at San Diego State University in California and continued it in Canada, and in the meantime here in Belgium at Issue Leuven. In a nutshell, is a project that applies graph theory, that is network science and poetry, but that has a significant performance component that involves interactive coding and dataset assemblage, collective dataset assemblage, from whence the term I coined, data commoning, in several publications that I will detail a bit here very briefly. Community in as performed. So common would be like some, as in commons, but turned into a verb, as in, expressing an action. And therefore, having this underlying concept of community in/as performance. And then in digital space, the term as, and I use the term as defined by Stephen Kennedy, which we can talk about in detail further on, if case be. Based on that, I see performance as data, as intermediation, as community, as action. So performance equals data as intermediation equals community as action. Again, the term being data commoning. So, but then such events and such approaches involve subversive approach to web-based corporate monopoly and or control. Again, big subjects in digital humanities, strongly referenced. And while dealing with that, reforming the web, capital W, uppercase W, by performing community-based webs. From whence this other term I coined, webformance. Data commoning webformance would be like, the coined term for such events in which you have a performance of community involved in collectively assembling data and using community-based webs in disrupting and or subverting the web. Digitization thus involves the re-digitalization of communities by means of and as data. You see, I keep saying digitalization because I cannot think of digitization without digitalization. Digitalization would be like digitizing data, right? I'm getting a bit pedantic here, but I apologize for that. Digitalization, like a wider context in which we go digital, our culture goes digital, right? Digital spaces, the overall enveloping environment and medium of our connective cultures. I want to distinguish that, and that's also a practice-based remark, but also speaking to the kind of reflections I've been developing over time, as with regards to collections in and as performance. The first term relevant to distinctions to the distinctions I'm trying to make is collection computing. So in events like, well, I already mentioned the hashtag GraphPoem, but I also would also love to reference, and I will be referencing here, an artistic intervention by the Portuguese poet and critic and theorist Rui Torres, ARQUIVO, VIVO, ANARQUIVO. The title speaks for itself, doesn't it? You know, archives alive, live or alive, but also archives as anarchy, right? Anarchist intervention. And I see data there as being situated on multiple levels, right? Of which some I've already mentioned, and others can be detailed further on, time permitting. But what I'm headed for right now is the fact that in these events, a part of these events, what the participation and the participatory audience does is computing collections. And collection, again, I see as an umbrella term for what I already mentioned as being, you know, live archives, data commoning, and community in as performance. And this, you know, the concept of performance underlying such approaches applies to more traditional publications as well, or less seemingly traditional. A collection titled Us Poets, Foreign Poets. Us, you can read it both as US and us, and that's part of the message of the collection. Consisted of performing corpora as networks by taking advantage of electronic literature's intermediality, and then computationally analyzing the networks by resituating print and Jupyter notebooks as inextricably and dynamically conjoined within such projects. In other words, the collection emerged as a continuous intermedial exchange between print and Jupyter notebooks in ways that could allow neither of them to stand on their own independently from each other. By which I mean that whatever was in the print version, you know, in any print hard copy, if you will, of the collection came from Jupyter notebook computing the collection, and then the Jupyter notebook could not have ever existed without the data and the approaches featured in print. Moving on to, this is just like a brief, you know, sort of tableau of what happens in such performances. And you can see here on the left hand of your screen, you know, there's, you know, like a screenshot of a Jupyter notebook with some script running, and people can contribute, can interactively run the code and can contribute data to the data on which the script is run, to the data set on which the script is run. And then on the right hand of the screen, you can see the screenshot of the bot that the output of the Jupyter Hub, notebook feeds into, which in its turn feeds into a Facebook live streamed jam session. There's something that I recapped here very briefly, and that's, you know, that represents for me the opportunity to present the other significant, I think, concept and this equation, sort of, you know, the other side of the medal, the other side of the coin, or the reverse of the medal, computational collection. I mentioned, you know, collection computing, and now I'm talking about computational collections. Again, collection in the umbrella term that Sally was mentioning earlier on, and myself in within performance community involving contexts. And a computational collection in that context is the collection that computes. The collection computes the collection. And why am I saying that? Well, for the reasons I just mentioned, and I can detail further on, that you have in projects like, performance like the graph poem, or anthologies like the one I just mentioned, you have a collection that develops automatically, that keeps expanding, and the performance representing the event or the collection consists of that collection expanding in and of itself. And that occasions here, a brief tie-in with some of the cutting-edge approaches to data nowadays and networks. A point I'm trying to make is that developing projects like the one I just mentioned, or presenting events, which are pretty much the same thing for me, involve softwarized data, softwarized collection. And the cutting-edge directions I was mentioning refer to softwarized networks and edge computing mainly, that paved the way to digitization, both of them actually, as softwarization. In a wider context, and giving a bit of a background here, network data, in my case, grave poems, and humans and AI overlap, and therefore data kind of becomes present and manifest as the other in the process of becoming ourselves as in HCI networks, human computer interaction networks, as we articulate them further and further into otherness. A bit of apparatic maybe, and might sound a bit confusing, but I can detail that as well. Now, I think something that is directly relevant to such concerns, a point I've been trying to make is the H shaping the D within DH. Well, DH, and also the literary as the D, that is the digital, right? Well, the H is in humanities, shaping the digital within DH, but DH, not only the established acronym for digital humanities, but also for data/digital heritage. And I'm giving here a couple of examples. I already mentioned the statement made by Tobias Blanke, very relevant one, about the contribution of humanities to AI. I'm giving an example of my own work here. In a wider context, literature can be seen as the digital genre, or even as the digital. Again, maybe a bit outrageous, but ready to detail that, those who are interested during the Q&A. And even a wider scope of this concern would be, how do you develop, for instance, hermeneutic inventio in Latin, right? One of Ramsey's contentions, Stephen Ramsey. Very recently, digital hermeneutic visualization, and also forthcoming, like these days, special issue of Interférence littéraire, Julie Burkholz, yeah, we all know her, and Leah Botke, making a strong point about network data visualization involving both close and distant reading, and both quantitative and qualitative analysis or analyses. Therefore, I can, to sum up briefly here, the points that I was trying to make, or rather touch on briefly, and saving time for the Q&A, where whichever, if any of these points grabbed any attention, we would have the opportunity to further develop. I see collection as generative and generating live, right? And heritage is live. I'm drawing again on the recent contributions to media studies and media philosophy, and particularly intermediality, on making a point about network corpora expanding automatically according to the algorithms they are informed by, and thus making emerge a certain life heritage, heritage being live in certain acceptances, in a number of acceptances. Heritage is being recuperated and converted, right, digitized, and thus made live. But also heritage is being live as part of an evental approach to data, and then heritage in and of itself working as a technical organism. I'm drawing here a number of authors that I listed there, and ultimately on Simondon, the philosopher, about technology, capable of continuation of life by means other than life, to make a point about live heritage, or heritage alive, that represents data as performative knowledge. Some selected references, and thank you. Looking forward to your questions, and thank you so much for your attention.